Every day, you wake up as your own boss, making your own way. Every day, you continue your journey to change the world, your team, and yourself. Every day, you encourage, congratulate, celebrate, and reach toward your goal of being the best and providing the best. The Build Your Best Business Show is for you. The real stories of building a business from other owners and founders along the journey. Find the support and advice you need to successfully start, grow, manage, and exit your business. What are you going to do today to build your best business?
We're on site at 3686, which is in Nashville. It's a conference that brings together entrepreneurs and investors. And we're sort of on the investment side for this conversation. I'm talking with Victoria Fram. She is co-founder and managing director of Vilcap Investments, LLC.
Very specific.
Very specific. So tell me a little bit about Vilcap Investments. You've got an awesome background. You've done a lot of very interesting things, but let's start off with Vilcap Investments.
Yeah, so Village Capital more broadly is a system to discover, develop, and invest in the best entrepreneurs addressing real-world problems. So that for us includes things like health, education, financial services, and then on the environmental side, sustainable agriculture and energy. So those 5 buckets broadly are sort of what we see as, cumulatively trillion-dollar industries that are somewhat overlooked, in our opinion, by a lot of early stage investors. We have a lot of money out there that can get you food delivery a little bit faster or more conveniently, and we think we're missing the mark on a lot of more pressing issues like how to get healthy food delivered once you get out of the hospital, something that we heard about this morning from Senator Bill Frist, thinking about sort of social determinants of health that might cross some of those industries.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah.
So the thing that we do now where you never call a stranger and just get into their car randomly.
Right.
But we encourage it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And then we have these larger problems that people do, they're not as sexy.
Yep.
And it's like starting a service-based business. You can make a lot of money doing a janitorial service or building something that's that way, and that they are overlooked. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so I think, one of the reasons that we talk about a lot is when you look at the sources of capital as they are today, venture as an industry is very concentrated, both geographically, the places that it has concentrated, and also demographically, so the types of people that are making decisions about how capital is allocated. And within those pools, you find that the types of problems people are sort of attracted to solving are the things that affect them, right? So, if I'm at a restaurant and want to be able to pay my check a little bit faster, and I have the engineering skills to create an app that would solve that problem, and that's the first problem that's top of mind in terms of, the daily things that could be working better for me, maybe that's the first thing I'm going to go run out to start a company to do. But if I, am living in a community that doesn't have enough transportation options to get me safely to a grocery store where I can buy fresh produce that would improve my health, and I don't know where to get capital to solve that problem, I'm probably going to be less prone to actually succeed at building that business. And one of the things that we are trying to do at Village Capital is make sure that everybody who has an idea that we think should see market traction and is solving much larger scale issues in those 5 sectors that we focus in gets a shot at making that a reality. So we look for people with real lived experience of the problems that they're trying to solve. And we think a lot of those people right now are overlooked by the system.
Okay, so that's really interesting because there's a whole conversation I've had a couple of them about, find a problem that you have and solve it. Okay?
Yep.
And so very specifically like, I wish I could pay my bill 2 seconds faster.
Yep.
That's something that I might solve.
Right.
But the person so you're advocating, just to make sure that I'm very clear, that you want the person who has the problem to be solving the problem. You're not looking for like helicopter where somebody would come in and say, we're going to come in and solve this problem for this region or this market.
Right.
Because it's really not as meaningful to that person.
Right. And we think, there's been a ton of capital wasted on those types of helicopter interventions that let me as an investor sitting in San Francisco or wherever I may be based think about what this community needs, and impute sort of my own perspective on how I would go about solving that problem when I'm actually not the customer who's paying for that problem to be solved.
Yeah, and it reminds me, there's a documentary, and I can't remember which one it is, but there's one that talks about this concept of us, and I say us, meaning us Americans, we sometimes go do these things. So like when the earthquake happened in Haiti, we sent a bunch of people, sent a bunch of like solar panels down.
Right.
And we disrupted the solar panel industry that already existed. They had a company down there, and now they're out of business because we were shipping free solar panels.
Right.
So it's like fix
all
it
of those
locally,
unintended
see it locally.
consequences, right?
Yeah.
So part of what we build are communities around entrepreneurs all around the world that are solving problems that we think are specific to the place where they're based. So in Nashville, given how much innovation and expertise there is around healthcare, we'll bring a group of healthcare entrepreneurs together here and say, can we help sort of galvanize some of the resources around you, leverage the local assets that are already here, be they, great medical expertise, customers, big payers and purchasers, academic resources that can contribute to sort of the policy aspects of healthcare, and capital sources that can help entrepreneurs grow their businesses.
Right.
And think about the sort of full set of resources that it takes an entrepreneur to get from idea to market. But we would rather see those innovations happen at the sort of initiation and development of people that are best suited to solve them.
Yeah, and they think through, I would imagine they would think through the end game a little better.
Right.
So is this going to work long term?
Yep.
Not just an immediate, what's the thing we could do now and get it fixed?
Right.
Yeah,
you care about your stakeholders if you've lived with those stakeholders.
Right, and you got to see them every day.
Yeah.
Or it may be something that impacts you.
Right.
You're like, yeah. So I want to come back to this a little bit as we go through the conversation, but how did you get in? I know how you did, but how did you get into, tell the audience how you got into this space.
Yeah, so originally I was motivated by kind of the problem side of a lot of the global challenges that I mentioned we care about. And my lens had been that if I wanted to help solve them, that I would probably need to go work at a nonprofit to do that. And I spent my first year or so out of college doing that in Kenya and Uganda and China and the Netherlands, thinking mostly about how development issues related to international conflict. So if you think about individuals as their own economic agents of change, if somebody can see a clear path to their economic prosperity, they're probably less likely to want to engage in conflict and probably quicker to try to resolve it or rebuild from it. So I spent about a year in a bunch of different places working on those types of issues, and really was still very motivated by trying to solve them, and somewhat frustrated that the philanthropic or traditional development and aid approaches to doing so was going to probably move the needle but not solve them entirely. And that the capital markets and business-based approaches had a much larger role to play. But I had no investment skills. And so thinking about like how can I direct some of the interest in business or market making to these issues was initially seemed like a dead end. How can I get those skills? So I moved from Kampala, Uganda to New York and started working for a private equity fund to try to learn how to invest.
That's a huge change.
Yeah.
Going about
really
the other
change.
way,
Right.
but coming that way would be really big. Yeah.
And spent the next 3 years during the financial crisis learning how to invest. And was lucky to see that in a really interesting time in the capital markets and think about how value is created, how you can think about underwriting opportunities that might look distressed today. And incidentally, the asset class I was investing in was private equity, commercial real estate, not that similar to early stage startups, but the risk profile and thinking about how to get comfortable with value creation, there is a lot of transferability in those skills. So spent some time doing that, and then figured out how to kind of pivot back to applying those investment skills to things that I cared about a little bit more than commercial real estate. And so worked on an agricultural fund in East Africa, went to business school, spent some time at the Gates Foundation on their program-related investment team. And
was
then
that an intentional choice?
To try to pivot back to...
to work in the Bill and Melinda Gates
Yeah,
Foundation.
yeah. So, it was a tremendous opportunity, one that I had briefly during business school, to think about, this, the traditional construct for foundations has been think about how to invest 95% of our assets to purely growing the endowment base of the foundation, and then think about deploying 5% of those assets to the grant-making activities that are consistent with what the foundation was set up to do. And program-related investments allow the grant-making part to kind of get closer to the endowment part, and say we're going to use what traditionally would have been used for the 5%, so a very limited pool, and instead think about how we can recover some of that capital and still be investing in a way that's consistent with our mission. I think what's even more exciting is that we're seeing some foundations get to the stage where they're thinking about 100% of their assets in one pool, and that everything has to be invested consistent with the foundation's mission. So we've seen Heron Foundation and others. Ford Foundation recently announced a $1 billion commitment over the next 10 years into MRIs and other tools, mission-related investments, other tools that sort of combine both sides of the house so that we're no longer thinking about impact on one side, financial return on the other. And that kind of integration is something that we care about deeply at Village Capital, because all of the companies that we work with have a social or environmental mission at their core, and yet don't anticipate compromising at all on the financial profile that they want to build the business to achieve. And that's consistent with what our investors are looking for.
Very cool. Okay, we're going to go to a commercial break. When we get back, I want to get a little tactical. So I'm going to bring it down from kind of the 20,000 foot level to the identification of the entrepreneur, what you see is sort of missing in the ecosystem.
Yep.
So what is it? Because I could see a big, someone who, like you said, knows how to get my bill paid faster because it's just, I'm a technologist, versus someone who's like, we've got this problem, we can't get water, right?
Yeah.
Like those are two, like what are the skill sets? How do you even come in and start solving that?
Yep.
Keep them in the resolve? That's all very interesting to me. Talking today with Victoria Fram. She is co-founder and managing director of Village Capital, VillCap Investments. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. We're coming to you from 3686 in Nashville, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Congratulations, you're your own boss. Now comes the hard part. It's not just about starting a business, it's about successfully managing and growing that business to an eventual exit. And along that entrepreneurial journey, you're going to run into questions and problems that you need quick answers to. Things like, do you need a business plan? How do you read a balance sheet? How do you talk to an investor? When do you bring on a founder? Or what if you're having problems with your partner? These are the types of things that you run into as you're trying to grow that business to the next level, and they may not be the things you want to share in public with other people. They're the problems and issues that arise that, as I have experienced along my own entrepreneurial journey, that I needed to have someone I could trust to reach out to and have a conversation and get a different perspective. And it was often those short conversations that would be the thing that moved me from where I was to where I needed to be. It's for that reason I created the On-Demand CXO product offering. On-Demand CXO is something that you can use to have a conversation with a trusted advisor about what's going on in your business. We do a 1-hour phone call to talk about your business, talk about your objectives, and understand what it's going to take to move you from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. From there, you have ongoing access to a Slack channel to ask me questions in private about what's going on in your business, so that I can provide some advice or connections to my network to individuals who can help you solve against that problem. You will also have access to my Facebook page, which is full of other entrepreneurs who are along the same journey, to have more broad conversations, things that you trust and would talk about in a networking event. But when you need to go and have that conversation with a trusted advisor, you will have the ability to have a conversation with me in a place that's safe, completely anonymous, and unbiased. I want to see you succeed and build your very best business.
And we're back. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. We're focused on the entrepreneurial journey. We're talking about a kind of a different focus today, which is interesting, with Victoria Fram. She's the co-founder and managing director of Village Capital, Vilcap Investments. I'm giving you all kinds of different names for your company. And a very interesting way that you approach looking at what kind of entrepreneurs you're investing in, what kind of problems you're solving, which are bigger, more important problems than some of the ones we sort of celebrate.
Yeah.
I'm a convenience guy. I do love the fact that all that stuff happens, but these are the things that are the next couple of decades. If we don't solve them, they're going to impact all that other convenience things we worry about.
Right.
So, my question is to get down into kind of a tactical identification of the right person in a market to start trying to even solve one of these problems. Like, how does that come about?
Yeah. So one of the core beliefs that we hold is that while potential is everywhere, opportunity is not. So we actually think, oftentimes we get the question like, well, how can you be sure that people actually have ideas outside of some of the core markets? We're seeing venture capital, 75% of it go to just 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. Like, if it's going to those places, that must be where all the good ideas are, right? And we think it can't possibly be true that all of the good ideas, or 75% of them that deserve funding, are there.
As a Southeast guy, that would make me very sad.
Right. So we think it takes a little bit more work to find entrepreneurs and great potential ventures that are outside of the places where capital markets are already functioning quite well to support early stage businesses. And one of the ways that we do this is to create networks in places that are outside of those markets. So in each of the regions where we work, we'll bring together a group of 10 or so entrepreneurs that are all working in a similar industry. And we'll, over the course of 3 or 4 months, have them work on their own businesses. So we take them through a methodology that we've now run in more than 50 programs around the world, 13 countries, that are sort of the core fundamental building blocks of growing a startup. So how do you think about building the right team? How do you think about validating your market? How do you think about testing different pricing and distribution strategies? And we give them the sort of frameworks and tools to think about those resources. But we actually also ask something of them. So we, at the same time, are having them evaluate each other against our investment criteria.
Wow, okay, yeah.
So you have, let's call it 10 entrepreneurs working on health innovations in Nashville. They might not all be based in Nashville, but they have the same sort of lingua franca of knowing how to get a healthcare business off the ground. And they might be at slightly different stages or different, experiences that they've worked through, but have a lot of common mutual respect and empathy for how hard it is to actually start a business. And one of the things that we think is the most valuable is, as a founder, which other entrepreneurs may be great at raising money, but not actually have that much substance behind them. If you go to any industry...
So many people won't admit that. There are entrepreneurs who are really good at raising money.
Yeah.
I worked for some.
Yeah.
And then they don't build the business.
Right.
Like, they're really good at getting the VC to write the check.
Right.
But you got to have somebody else to build the business. Yeah.
And incidentally, we found in our programs, you have stats in the early stage and venture ecosystem, like less than 15% of early stage funding going to female founders, less than 1% going to founders of color. And in our portfolio, about 40% of our portfolio are female founders, about 12% of our portfolio are founders of color. And we've found that this sort of process, where they are actually having to evaluate their peers and demonstrate success over the 3 or 4 month diligence process in our programs, levels the playing field considerably to actually overemphasizing the ability to execute and underemphasizing the ability to pitch. So, as you see some of the trends around who's getting funded, much of it is who can tell the best 3 or 4 minute story.
Yeah.
Who can go in and
that. And that's I write articles for Inc. And if I write one about a pitch, it's read. People love it because they want to know how to do that.
Right.
So it's about being a good presenter, a good sales.
Yeah. A lot of the time when we talk about how to raise money, the number one thing is build a better business.
Yes.
Don't learn how to pitch better.
Right.
Build a better business.
Yes, absolutely. And knowing that the implementation, the strategy on the back end, and regrettably, those people are not often the best pitchers.
Right.
They're the person who knows how to run everything in the back, those kind of things. So how do people end up in these groups?
Yeah.
Do you find them or do they apply?
We find them. So we think, a lot of the time, especially if we're talking about these founders who are sort of heads down, deep in trying to navigate some of these problems that we think are worth solving, they're not looking for what's the next thing I can apply to or sort of how am I going to find the right investor. They're trying to just bootstrap their way to market. So the opportunity and the obligation is really on us seeking them out. So on our team, we have full-time in each of those sector areas that I mentioned, practice leads that are sourcing great businesses that may not be yet discovered by other early stage investors. We have a network of tremendous pipeline partners around the country and around the world who are seeing deal flow that's too late for them, either too late or too early,
right.
University contexts where they're sort of looking at what is the next stage that this company can graduate into as they try to commercialize, or later stage investors that are saying, we want to see a little bit more validation from this team, but it would be great if you could try to work with them. So we will look at, a pool of a couple hundred applicants for each of our programs, and then narrow it down to the 10 or so that will participate in them.
Okay, all right, yeah, and so that's a very cool approach.
Yeah,
so it's where you
thanks.
get the call, and I could see those people saying, oh no, I'm just trying to put this together myself.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And so then as you look at the things that you have to do for those individuals, so if they've not been, they're not out classically looking for the money, they're not the person who knows how to pitch, is there some patterns or is it all over the place of what kind of support they may need to get themselves to the next level?
Yeah, I think it is sort of case by case depending on how far along their business has been, and they may have raised some amount of non-dilutive funding either through SBIR or NSF, other grant programs that have gotten them to sort of proof of concept, or they may have raised a small amount of friends and family funding, but now they're thinking about how do I navigate the right capital raise for my business? So we talk a lot about investment readiness and how to prepare for taking on capital, how to think about growing to meet a market and what milestones you'll need to meet to get to the next round of funding. But we also talk a lot about the business fundamentals of how you identify where the gaps are on your team and what it will take to level up to a place where you will attract a team that's eventually better than you are at executing this business, and sort of what that's
so scary.
Right.
The founder is always scared. It's almost, you got to work yourself out of the job.
Yep.
Yeah, you're looking to take a different role or to be in a different place in the company, and that's a very fearful thing.
Right.
That I'm not right for it.
Yeah.
At a later date.
Yeah.
When you're talking about ready to take on capital, what unpack that for me a little bit. Like
sure.
What might be a sign that I am or a sign that I'm not?
Yeah. So we have a whole framework that we walk people through that's called venture investment readiness. But we think about it at a bunch of different stages and sort of make it much clearer to entrepreneurs what investors will expect to see and the outcomes that they'll expect based on the level of capital that they're willing to provide. So friends, family, and sort of non-dilutive funding is one early stage bucket. Some grants, are a component of that. Then you might graduate to a seed level where we'll look to see a little bit of customer validation and the beginning stages of product market fit, and at clearly a Series A level, much more product market fit, and the evidence that you can get to a Series B where you'll be much more growth stage. And we have more defined metrics around what each of those look like for various types of business models. But I think one of the other things we try to do with the entrepreneurs that we work with is be much more upfront with them about what taking capital on means. So I think a lot of people at an early stage think like, great, if you want to be an equity investor in my business, you're going to write me a check today. And that sort of seems like a free check because I'm giving you, a piece in terms of percentage ownership. But today, what my business might not be worth that much, might not seem like a lot. But further down the road, particularly if you want to remain incentivized as a founder, that might actually be the most expensive capital you can take on.
Right.
And so we've tried to be much more creative about how we think about some of the right types of capital for different stages of business or different growth trajectories, and what alternatives to equity might look like. So we do some revenue share agreements that I think are particularly well suited to founders who either don't see a typical exit path, either in the timeline that they want to get there or that they never really want to sell their business.
Right.
And that can
So
still
you're
be
supporting that, which is a nice
right.
thing. Yes.
And that can still be a great outcome for investors. So, the calculus on our side is, would I rather have great uncertainty about getting a 5 or 10x multiple on my money in a traditional equity investment, or would I rather get 2 or 3 times my money in a revenue share agreement where I have great visibility into the eventual timeline of it, and it's still flexible for the entrepreneur because it can sort of vary depending on the success of the business at any given time, but doesn't put the same constraints and pressure on them to sort of flip my initial investment within a few year time frame.
Yeah, very cool. Very interesting. I love the fact that you have that flexibility, because that's always some choice that people feel like they're making, and it may not make them appropriate to certain funds, things like that. So in the last few minutes, we have future. So if there is this, lack of interest in, I'll call it the less sexy, do you
real
see that?
world enterprises,
the real world enterprises. Do you see a change in that? Do you see that changing? Is that right?
Yeah. I think we are seeing a lot more attention, and it's been great to see much more of the language around those types of industries used in other early stage and venture funds. So people will talk more about like world positive solutions, and don't do it in a way, are explicitly not trying to include themselves in kind of the impact investing camp, but just see these as really large market opportunities that a lot of investors will make a lot of money solving. And I think it's becoming increasingly clear with some of the political events of the last 6 months or so that it's going to take a lot of businesses thinking more holistically about solving a lot of these issues for themselves, that policy and other governmental roles clearly are still involved, but a lot will be left to the private sector to think about solving. And frankly, a lot of the rational economic choices, for instance, in energy, as we're seeing costs come down for a lot of renewable and sustainable approaches, you will build a more sustainable and longer term viable business if you pay attention to how to incorporate some of these things today. So I think it's becoming a much more rational choice for a whole host of actors. And that's good news for us. We want to see the fields grow. We think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for both entrepreneurs and investors to be a part of the solution.
I agree. There's so much money in the non-sexy stuff.
Yep.
I love those little companies that are hidden in the industrial parks,
right.
working on things, like that those are great.
Yep.
They're great. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time. And
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference. We're coming to you from 3686 in Nashville. We've been talking with Victoria Fram. She's co-founder and managing director of Village Capital. If you want any more information on her or her organization, you can check out the show notes. You've been listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Now, what are you going to do to build your best business?